This is the Plant Yourself podcast. I'm Howard Jacobson of PlantYourself.com, the Big Change Program, and WellStart Health. This podcast is part of my mission to help you live a passionate and persistent life. Today's guest, Dave Chase, is one of those quiet innovators who moves mountains through his vision, his energy, and just sheer persistence. And as you'll hear, with a healthy dose of trickster energy into the mix. Dave is one of the founders of Healthcare Rosetta, which is a nonprofit dedicated to accelerating, and I quote from their website, adoption of simple, practical, non-partisan fixes to our healthcare system. So Dave has been a mover and shaker for a long time. He was a CEO and a co-founder of a company called Avado, which is a digital health company that was acquired by WebMD and Medscape. And Dave's life and career were rocketing along until he was really shaken by the deaths of 10 people who were very close to him over the span of just a few years. And he got to witness firsthand how the healthcare system failed them, draining their spirits and their wallets while not providing care or comfort. And as an entrepreneurial go-getter, Dave decided to do something about it. And given the messed up state of healthcare at the moment, he makes a startling claim. He says, healthcare is already fixed. In other words, we know what works and how to implement those fixes. On a small scale, everything that's needed is already in place somewhere. And it's our job to publicize and scale those fixes until they change the entire system. Which begs the question, if this is all so easy, then what's standing in our way? And as Dave writes in his masterful and infuriating book, The CEO's Guide to Restoring the American Dream, only 3 trillion things. And those 3 trillion things are, of course, the $3 trillion spent annually on healthcare in the United States. And much of that money is misspent on ineffective and unnecessarily expensive treatments. So the book is a handbook for CEOs who are desperately trying to reduce their organization's healthcare costs, but it also reads like a crime thriller. Because on page after page, I found myself shocked at the perverse incentives that reinforce this crooked system. And this system costs lives, promotes suffering, and as the title of the book says, it is literally stealing the American dream of middle-class prosperity from an entire generation. Before we get to the interview, just a couple of quick things. One is my friend Jamie Friesen at Natural Vegan Club has launched a line of wholesome, healthy, and sustainable bath and beauty products that are not only vegan, but are also handmade and packaged responsibly. I got a deodorant that was wrapped in cardboard, and it's a kind of cool, like a stick that you have to push up. So it didn't have all that plastic you're going to have to throw away afterwards. If you're interested, I don't get any money from this, but I do have a tracking link so that we can see how many people from this show go visit. Just go to plantyourself.com/naturalvegan, and you can check out what they've got. He sent me a box that I'm really enjoying. Second thing, we're starting another cohort of the Big Change Program, this time combined with WellStart Health, on May 14th. 2018. If you're interested, you could go to bigchangeprogram.com and read all about it, but you can't sign up there anymore. Instead, go to wellstarthealth.com/program. There you can read the details. And from there, you can click the apply button at the bottom and sign up. There's no credit card handling up there, so you get to apply before we do any of those financial transactions. You know, if you feel like this is your year to finally get healthy, to break free of cravings and addictions and any sort of behaviors that are not in line with your values, your goals, and your priorities, the Big Change Program has helped a lot of people do that. It's a really robust ecosystem of daily videos, of calls, of texts, of live video group discussions, and of community. The big differentiator is that we view living a healthy life as a set of skills, not as your character. So if it was your character, then there would be nothing we could do about it except just wish you had a better character, more, willpower, passion, motivation, stuff like that. But since it's learnable skills, you can learn them. And that's what the Big Change program is all about. So if you're interested, go to wellstarthealth.com/program and then read about it and click apply at the bottom. And if you like it and if you are accepted, then we will hit the ground running on May 14th. Hey, this is a late breaking edit. I posted this interview earlier today, and I just got a note from Dave Chase in my inbox saying, here's a secret link to download the book that Dave wrote, The CEO's Guide to Restoring the American Dream, for free as a PDF from their website. So you ready for the link? It's healthrosetta.org/friends. So go grab the PDF, healthrosetta.org/friends, read through it, read the intro, read the first chapter, read the conclusion. And of course, it would be super cool if you were to thank Dave Chase for his time and appearance on this podcast by then buying the book with money. Okay, back to our regularly scheduled program. All right, time for today's interview. So let's talk about healthcare and how to restore the American dream. Without further ado, Dave Chase, welcome to the Plant Yourself podcast.
My pleasure to be on. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you wrote this book that I have just finished reading for the second time, The CEO's Guide to Restoring the American Dream. And I read it because my CEO told me to read it. So I guess you've nailed your target market. But honestly, I wouldn't have necessarily looked at the book or been interested in sort of the topic of sort of the minutiae of healthcare finance and economics and benefits. But once I read it, it felt like one of the most important things that anyone who's interested in the health of our country and our planet could read. And that's kind of why I wanted to get you on the phone to kind of bridge the gap between these really sort of esoteric topics and this hugely important behemoth, which is our healthcare system.
Yeah, I have to agree. I really come to the conclusion that, unfortunately, our status quo healthcare system has become the greatest immediate threat to, I believe, the well-being of our country and probably by the extension to the rest of the world. It's that magnitude, and I think it's evident as you start to connect the dots.
Yeah, so I'd love to start with your journey to this world, because you didn't start out in healthcare, but it's probably why you're able to see it with such fresh eyes. Can you just talk a little bit about where you come from and what sort of eyes you brought to the issue?
Well, I mean, I'm not on the clinical side, but I did start my career with in consulting with Accenture. And so I did spend time inside of a couple dozen different hospitals, and then went on to start Microsoft's healthcare partner ecosystem. And, but it was really something where, in some sense, it could have been any industry, been in the tech side of the industry. But at a personal level, what happened was, unfortunately, by the time I was 35, I had 10 friends who were my age or younger who died. And, each one of those is a gut punch for sure. But the last one was particularly brutal. It was a friend that had been a very successful business executive, and she went through the cancer journey. And it was just a real testament to the problems we have in our healthcare system. And the last time that I saw her, she was in a hospital bed, and frankly, she should have been sent home to die in peace with her family and loved ones, and instead was, hooked up to a bunch of machines and tubes, and they were literally and metaphorically sucking the life out of her medically and financially. And as I reflected back on that, I realized that the system had failed her at every level. And frankly, I'd been a part of that system and realized, what, I've got to do something about that. And at the time, I didn't quite know what that was. But as I left healthcare for over a decade, but as I came back, I came to this realization that, some of what I shared earlier in terms of the magnitude of the problem, but I also found some good news, and that every structural fix that was needed to address these brutal problems that we were seeing had already been invented and proven and modestly scaled or replicated. And by comparison to this dystopian system that we had created where, the most passionate and smart people, that I certainly grew up, often became nurses and doctors. And here we were spending all this money producing very average outcomes that, it was just so sad to see what was going on. And by comparison, these people who'd cracked the code, that was practically utopia by comparison. And I sort of joked, this is just a marketing problem. Everybody would want that. If they could, it's actually much better for the patient. It's much less expensive. And so, it's just a marketing problem. We just need to get the word out. And so that's really what put me on this journey and ultimately led me to write the book and I guess really catalyze this movement that, I'm on right now.
Right. And so, the first bit of marketing that hit me was right up at the beginning of the book where you write, I think it's a chapter heading, "We have gone to war for far less." Can you talk about what you're talking about there? What is the this that wars have underperformed in terms of their impact on our lives?
Well, in terms of, if you break down, that chapter, I go through, what were those things that, are the status quo that are really hitting us hard. The one that I have a particular focus on is what it's doing to our future and what it's doing to our kids and education. And, if some other country was doing what healthcare is doing to our kids in terms of stealing opportunity, stealing funding. It's so bad that Bill Gates devoted an entire TED Talk to how healthcare is devastating education funding. If some other country was doing that, we would go to war. And if you look at the magnitude of harm from overtreatment and misdiagnosis because of really kind of systemic issues in terms of the incentive system and all of that, these are things that, and I think my name's Dave, I had a top 10 list. I think I went through 10 items of, that are things that are really devastating our country and our well-being. They're all there. And, I think when you put it in those terms, it's like there's a sense of urgency that we really have to apply. You think about it, we're a country of problem solvers, and we're a country of people who want to see the right thing done. I know that if there was some group of adults that you saw were stealing from, kids in a park, you'd step in and do something about it. Well, that's basically what's going on at a large scale. Is we're massively, stealing from our kids, not only from today and what they, what opportunities they have, but also in the future. One of the sort of light bulb moments for me was when I was, it was actually shortly after the time my friend passed away that I mentioned earlier, where some kid from a high school came up to me and was selling chocolate bars to raise money for some school fundraiser. And I thought, oh, this is great. Are you planning some, band trip, or something like that, some kind of extracurricular type of activity? But no, they said, no, we're raising money for some science lab supplies, that we don't have for our science department. And I was just sitting there going, what? This is crazy. Like, taxes paid for that when I was a kid. Why are we having to have kids, sell candy bars to raise money? And so, I was one of those kids, growing up that asked why a lot. To get at the root cause of anything, you ask why 5 times, you get to the root cause of it. And every time I did that, it kept coming back to the way we purchase healthcare is incredibly ineffective. And just one facet of that, if you look at where, every dollar, if you break out where every dollar goes, only about 15 to 25 cents of every dollar goes to the real value creators in healthcare, the nurses and doctors. And, we squander dollars in all kinds of other areas in terms of fraud, waste, abuse, what we call pricing failure, where there's no correlation between what we pay and the value we get, over-treatment, misdiagnosis. I mean, there's just a whole bunch of things that just we squander dollars right and left. And so,
right. So
we all pay for that.
There was one graphic in the book on page 49 that comes from David Goldhill's book, Catastrophic Care, and it really shocked me. It's the iceberg picture,
yep,
where showing that a millennial who has a good job, works until she's 65, dies at 80, ends up making $180,000 a year, that basically half of her entire total lifetime income will go to pay for healthcare. Both the visible,
yep,
the deductibles, out of pocket, the insurance premiums, and then the hidden through the employer premiums, taxes, and federal and state taxes. So you just mentioned a bunch of things that contribute to this. But like you said, the root cause is this incredibly inefficient purchasing system, and there's that and over-treatment. So can you talk first about the purchasing system? I was real interested in the history of sort of where you see this beginning after World War II. Can you talk a little bit about how we got to where we are?
Yeah. And the other thing that's striking with that graph is that's actually the optimistic view that healthcare costs only grow at half the rate of inflation, which doesn't happen too often. So it actually grows at the rate of inflation, which it usually outpaces. It's 2/3 of their lifetime earnings. So it's even worse. But in terms of the history, it does go back to World War II when there were wage controls, and there was a loophole that employers had where the health benefits weren't included in that. So that was one way that some employers started to differentiate their offers. And then that was codified into our tax law. And it is the single biggest tax break in the entire, tax system is the employer, healthcare tax exemption. And so that has really fueled the system. And it's created a disconnect between the people who receive the care and how all the payments flow. So there are a lot of issues around that. But it is what we have today. And interestingly, as I spend time in other countries, in some ways, as in the U.S., the government's getting progressively more involved, with having had employers driving a lot of it for non-elderly, non-low income. In other countries, it's kind of the other way. Now, increasingly, employers are getting more involved. If you look at places like Canada, sort of, the Canadian Medicare, sort of like our Medicare, where it doesn't cover things like vision and dental and mental health and some other things. So you see employers doing that. But that's a big backdrop on our system, is this sort of third or fourth party payment system. And that's created a disconnect where most people don't realize that what's driving 95% of the 20-year-long wage stagnation and decline in America is healthcare. Employers are spending a lot more money on employees than they did 20 years ago, but the problem is all the dollars have gone to healthcare. And so it doesn't feel like the employer's spending more, even though they are. And so it's created this real problem, where the math just doesn't work. Today you've got 60% of the workforce makes $20 an hour or less. The average family of 4 premiums are over $20,000, largely because of healthcare costs. Over half of households have less than $1,000 in savings. Today, over half the workforce has over $1,000 deductible. So you're a bad stub toe away from financial ruin in the way the system has been developed, and just kind of letting things get out of control. And so I do believe it's reached a breaking point. That's why you see, every day scores of employers are saying, wait a second, we can only shove so much onto the back of the employee's back. That's run its course. I mean, that's kind of been the blunt instrument way of dealing with it, is just say, oh, we need to give them, employees skin in the game. Well, it's kind of more like they've got kidney in the game now, in terms of how much you can push onto their backs. And, you can't, I mean, we've gone past, I think, any reasonable bounds. And, certainly I'm all big believer in patient empowerment and consumer engagement and all those kinds of things, but you have to, the math just doesn't work the way it is right now.
Right. Well, so I can see, like, when my kids were little, and I would say, go to the candy store or go to the toy store and get whatever you want, that would be a recipe for disaster, because they had no sense of how much things cost and how much they could have and how much they would enjoy. Better to err on the side of more rather than less. And that's kind of how you represent the American consumer, as enticed by the healthcare system, that more is better. You said if you have back pain, you'll do whatever you can to get rid of it, including, if your doctor says, surgery and opioids. What can we do about that kind of misaligned incentives, where people are getting as much as they can, even though much of it is unnecessary or overkill or even harmful?
Well, a big part of it is what we do is we ration choices. A lot of times people talk about rationing care. What we do in the system, where we've badly undermined our primary care system, take that back pain example. If you're told, if you have what feels like a knife in your back, and I've been there, I can definitely relate to that, and you're told the only way to fix that is to, either take this opioid or get this, lumbar fusion, and then followed by a bunch of opioids, that you're going to leave the hospital with, you do that. And a lot of people do. Well, Starbucks, Virginia Mason, they did a study of all the spinal procedures that were done. 90% of them didn't help at all. PT would have been more effective. And so when you don't ration choices, and this is what a good primary care setting avoids, is you actually lay out, hey, here's the options, here's what's going on, and why you're feeling this pain, and you could mask it in the short term, with some opioid, but the problem didn't magically disappear. And of course, there's the whole risk of becoming addicted. And so that's one of the key ways, where you have a non-rush, non-financially conflicted primary care setting. And, something like that, it may be PT is one of the best ways to address that. Obviously it's going to vary a little bit from one situation or not to another, but that's a good example where smart employers are doing this. Michelin, they put in a proper musculoskeletal management program. So far, they've gotten about a third of the employees that they'd like to get into the program into it so far, and that's already had a very substantial impact on overall company profitability, if you can believe that. Just getting a proper musculoskeletal management program, and so they keep people out of harm's way. That saves tremendous amounts of money. And people avoid that risk of getting hooked on opioids, and it makes all the difference in the world when you get that proper program in place.
Gotcha. So I think we can understand that the consumer can be taught to purchase things that are in alignment with their goals and values. The employer wants to keep costs down and have a healthy workforce. But I kind of always thought that the insurance companies had an incentive to keep people healthy. Like I thought about, like flood or fire insurance, you pay your premium, and the less flood or fire damage there is, the more the insurance company gets to keep. And I kind of innocently thought that's how it worked with healthcare. And so insurance companies would naturally push all the levers they could to get people healthy and to avoid these costs. But apparently health insurance doesn't work like that, right?
It doesn't. If you think about the examples you gave, like your house and your homeowner's insurance, we don't insure everything. We insure against something catastrophic like a fire. But, we don't pull out our State Farm card, when it comes time to paint our house or replace a dishwasher or, do spring cleaning or something like that. We've had the system where we try to, use the insurance infrastructure for everything imaginable in healthcare. And, if you like dealing with and paying for, the 40% insurance bureaucracy tax, go for it. But that just doesn't work well, for this. And then what on top of that, one of the things that really accelerated this dynamic where, it's like you said, it's kind of counterintuitive, where you would think the insurance companies, might actually want to do the equivalent of avoiding the house fire. When the Affordable Care Act was passed, there was this clause in there called medical loss ratio. It basically said that for every premium dollar that was collected, you have to pay out 80 or 85 cents on the dollar, depending on the size of employer or size of plan. And like that sounded good as a political soundbite. Oh, make those insurance companies pay for healthcare. But what that did instead was really just, kind of very obvious. I mean, I was out of the industry for over a decade, and I learned about this as I came back in, and it was really the first thing I wrote about. June 4th, 2010 in the Huffington Post, you could Google health insurance and bunker buster. And I predicted, because of this medical loss ratio, that premiums would go up 50%, because what they did was they told the insurance companies you could only make a 15% margin, on every dollar. And so if you're a publicly held insurance company, you've told Wall Street you're going to increase profits, say 15% every year, and your margin percentage is capped. The only way you can make that happen is to ensure, the denominator in that calculation goes up. And so you want to do everything possible to ensure that overall costs go up. And so there's this convenient partnership between the hospitals and the health plans to have costs go up and up and up, because that ensures their profits can go up. And so that's exactly what played out. I mean, I actually undershot it. I think there was a thing came out in the last week or two that said rates have gone up 60% since then on a blended rate. And, you know, that's a thing that's been kind of non-obvious. Like it sounded good politically, you know, to do that, but just if you understand shareholder fiduciary duty, you know, one insurance exec off the record told me, he goes, Dave, we are legally required to facilitate price gouging, you know, by the hospitals, basically. Like, whoa, that's a pretty stark statement, but that's basically what's happened.
So this is sort of like a Marx Brothers routine, right? Where yeah. You know, you make so little on each transaction that, you know, it's like you've got to do millions of them just to break even.
Yep.
Right.
That's pretty much what's happened.
And so they get paid they don't just get paid a premium and then have to pay out as claims arise. They get paid on a percentage of the claims?
Well, basically, yeah, indirectly, yes. So they're legally mandated to only get basically a 15% margin on those dollars. So if let's say they collect, just to use a little bigger number, but not a massive number, they collect $1 million of premiums, they have to pay out $850,000 in claims, or else, let's say they only paid out $750,000 in medical claims, they have to rebate $100,000 back. Like I said, that kind of sounds good in theory. Well, in practice, they're not going to let that happen unless they totally goof up. What they're going to do is say, oh, well, you know, last year we paid out $850,000, so we made $150,000 in profit using, you know, these fictitious example dollars. Well, you know, it's not acceptable to only make $150,000 next year, even though the underlying costs of healthcare haven't changed in the last year. We need to make sure that they go up. And so we need to make sure that we see the total premiums go to, say, 1.1 million or 1.2 million or whatever, so that the total dollars we make in profit, you know, in that example, 150,000 before, it goes up. If we want that to go up to 200,000, we need to make sure the overall premium dollars go up, and you know, basically make it work out, you know, math-wise that way.
So let's say I'm hired by one of the big insurance companies, Aetna, Cigna, US Healthcare, to run their wellness program, right? Or Blue Cross. They all have these wellness programs. You can go online, you can, you know, chat with nurses, you can get advice about diet and exercise and stuff. And let's say my heart's in the right place. I really want to get people well. And my program is phenomenally successful beyond anything that's ever seen in wellness. I'm working against my company's interests by getting people so well that they let's say in a crazy world, I reduce the claims to 100,000 instead of 1 million. Then what happens? What's the financial ramifications for the company if I'm that successful in my wellness program?
Yeah, in that example, so they were legally required to pay out $850,000 out of those $1 million in claims, but they only paid out $100,000. Then they would have to rebate $750,000 to their members, and so they don't get a benefit from that. You know, in theory, you know, the consumer does. Well, they're not going to really want that to happen, you know, because not only did their profits not go up, but they didn't, you know, they didn't really gain anything on a pure financial basis in that scenario.
Right. And then the following year, you might say, well, they should only collect, you know, 125,000 if they're only going to be paying out $1 million. So now their profits are still
Yep.
15%, but they're shrunk. So
Yep.
actual wellness is going in the wrong direction for the insurance company.
Yeah. Yeah. And the, the perception of them as the insurance company. I guess they sort of are in the individual market. But if you think about most of us, if we're not elderly or we're not low income, we get our benefits through our job. And so the real quote unquote insurance company is actually the employer. They happen to use these insurance companies to process claims, but they're the ones who are taking on financial risk. They're taking it on directly in a very direct way when they're self-insured, which is 2/3 of the workforce are in these self-insured plans. So again, a Blue Cross may process the claim, but it's actually the employer's money. But even when it's so-called fully insured, I can assure you that if you're Acme Corp and, the carrier paid out, $1.1 million in claims and they only collected $1 million from you, you're going to get whacked the next year. So you've really already been taking on the financial risk anyway. And so the real insurance company, if you will, isn't the so-called insurance companies, it's the employers. And that's really what, the CEOs and CFOs are waking up to. It's like, look, we're we can debate till the cows come home whether employer-based insurance makes sense or not, but it is the reality. And despite what the framers of the Affordable Care Act thought, they were, if you look at the estimates on uninsured rates and all that, in aggregate, they were actually quite accurate. The CBO numbers. Where they got it off was the individual market numbers weren't as big because they were expecting more employers to drop insurance. In reality, it went the other direction. The rate of employers providing insurance actually went up. And so it is a reality that probably isn't going to go away anytime real soon, particularly since the whole tax code really advantages that model.
Right. So your book is for the CEO, but you talk about sort of anyone with fiduciary responsibility at a company, and you point out that there's no other line item where every year you get worse and worse quality for more and more money. Like if I think about tech or office supplies or travel or just about anything else, there's this expectation that things are getting better. And they're going to get cheaper. Like the computer I have in front of me, I roughly, every 5 years, I pay $2,500 for a computer. And, it started in 1987 with a Mac SE, Macintosh SE. And now I've got the 27-inch iMac with, 5K resolution and Retina, whatever. And it just keeps getting better and better. But with healthcare, there's something that you call the annual kabuki dance that we've just come to expect. Can you talk a little bit about how that works?
Yeah. This get less, pay more deal that we've become accustomed to for the last 20 years. It's like we went from that, Mac Daddy, Mac that you have. And, each year we go from, that to, we've got a DOS, based health plan now, where we in terms of the actual experience, it's just gotten worse and worse and worse. And so, that's been the dynamic, unfortunately, where we just have to pay more, seemingly, even though, you may remember the second chapter in the book, I lay out that in the real market, the real market is defined by where there's direct contracts, which more and more employers are doing between providers and their organizations, or the cash-based market, which has grown hugely as there's been high deductibles and uninsured. There's actually quite a large cash-based economy in healthcare. In the real market, prices have been flat for at least 5 years. In the rigged market, which most people exist in, there's all these drivers to have costs go up and create what's, inside the industry they call medical trends. So they create this kabuki dance, as we say, where they say, oh, trend was 15% because of all these factors, one of which is enabling large-scale fraud to happen, because that's also in their financial interests. What we're such good guys, our rates, quote, only went up 11%. And so that's kind of partly like, oh, well, I guess that's as good as it can get. I'm stuck. I'm not happy about it. But boy, at least it's not 15%, and, that's part of the crazy thing that people have become accustomed to, even though you look at it and say, what actually changed? Are the doctors making way more? The nurses making way more? About the only area that's really significantly different over the last 10 years is so-called specialty drug categories. But other than that, doctors and nurses aren't paid, really differently than they were 10 years ago or whenever. And so it's just all part of that kabuki dance to make it look like costs have gone way up, even though they actually haven't. But they managed to do a good job of making you believe that.
Yeah. So to help me understand this, I have in front of me a coupon, a mailer that I got from our local vacuum cleaner supply store. And it says tune-up special, $32 for vacuum cleaner service. And it says must present coupon at time of drop-off. And so I'm thinking, like, what it should be is present it after we've given you the bill, and then we'll take 32% off of that. But if I present at the time of drop-off, that's sort of like the kabuki dance, right? They'll say, well, so now we're going to raise the rate by 32%, then we'll lop 32% off and you'll be happy. But you didn't know what the original basis of the service was.
Right. I can give you a 99% discount on anything if you let me pick the denominator in that calculation, right?
So you have a chapter on the 7 tricks. I think that was also an article of yours that I read online. One of them just floored me, and I'm just going to keep bringing it up at cocktail parties until I get uninvited, which was the story of this drug called Duexis. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, it's crazy. Trying to remember the specific over-the-counter drugs, but basically what it does is they take 2 generic over-the-counter
it was Motrin and Pepsid.
Yeah, Motrin and Pepsid. And, whatever that would cost, which is not much, they put it into one pill and charge, hundreds of, 100 times more. And say that's some amazing innovation that, rather than spending, whatever, $24, you're spending $3,000. And that's another example where that's where the, if the insurance companies were really watching your dollars and one of the arms of often it's an arm of insurance companies, so-called pharmacy benefit managers, if they were actually concerned about your bottom line, they would never approve that. But because they get a margin and because there's kickbacks that happen, they're called rebates that often then don't go back to the actual, one who's picking up the bill. That's one of the ways those have become wildly profitable companies. But yeah, that's exactly what they do. And there's examples up and down the line where these things that don't make a lick of difference in terms of your health outcomes, they can suddenly charge 100 times more than what they did previously.
Right. So I want to make sure we end with good news. And in order to do that, so this podcast is essentially a lifestyle podcast to help people be happier and healthier and more fulfilled and live on a healthier planet. And we talk a lot about lifestyle and lifestyle medicine. And I've just joined a startup that that reverses disease, chronic disease through education and lifestyle. And your book, it felt like put that into a broader context. Can you talk a little bit about how you see sort of, primary care, pre-primary care lifestyle as fitting in to this movement to rationalize healthcare?
Yeah, I mean, what you see the smart employers do, if I had to sort of sum it all up, what they do is they make good decisions, free or near free for their employees, and they make bad decisions expensive. And one of the good decisions is you get things like proper primary care, which we've done virtually everything to undermine primary care in this country, where when you have proper primary care, like what my family has, my parents have, and it's actually less expensive than the status quo system, they can address 92% of the issues that people come into the healthcare system for. And so it's great, where there's really, kind of three key ways that these things deliver value. One is they can just address the issues people come in for, the so-called acute episodes. Rather than you forcing to go to the ER or some urgent care clinic, they can address it there. It might be a broken arm, might be some, urinary tract infection, whatever it might be. So number one, they can address those acute episodes. Number two, they are designed to kind of go upstream and do good prevention, make sure that, you have lifestyle changes and things like that that are so incredibly important. You have health coaches are incredibly effective there. And then the third piece of it is they're sort of like your Sherpa, where if you have some medical complexity and, say if you're, running a health plan for an employer, you typically find 6 to 8% of the employees consume 80% of the dollars in a given year. And it's usually these more complex situations. And so the good primary care setting, they can help you navigate that complex situation. Because a lot of times people, when they're in that situation, they don't have just one thing, they might have multiple things. And our healthcare system tends to treat you like a series of disconnected body parts versus you're actually one, being. And so they can help you weigh out the different options of, should I do this approach or that approach? Which doctors, which medical centers should I go to? Those are the things that can be incredibly helpful to keep you out of harm's way, because there are certain centers where they do overtreat far more. They don't get the diagnosis right. I mean, you see, I think it was in chapter 12, I laid out how the rates of misdiagnosis for complex conditions like oncology and neurology and so on range between 25 and 67%. So, even if you had the best surgeon or oncologist in the world, but if you have it wouldn't matter if you have the wrong diagnosis. And so, a good primary care team helps you get to those people that they would send not only their patients to, but their own family members to. So those are things that's really important. And if you look at how we will rebuild and how we are rebuilding brick by brick the healthcare system, you see places like Denver and you see places like Seattle where you now have proper primary care available broadly enough in that metropolitan area, and keep you away from these financially conflicted kind of what I call milk in the back of the store primary care, where they're just sort of designed to churn you in and out so you get you to the high margin stuff. So those things are really important.
Gotcha. So you co-founded an organization, right, called Health Rosetta, I think is at healthrosetta.org, that is kind of a compendium of all these best practices. And one of the things you keep saying in the book is we don't need to figure this out. We already know what to do. We already can see all the right things to do. We just need to put them together, educate people on using them, and scale them. Can you talk a little bit about the Health Rosetta and who who should be interested in it and how it could benefit them?
Yeah, I mean, really everybody should be. I mean, the Health Rosetta isn't meant to be employer specific or even U.S. specific, although the U.S. employer market's where we're started because, if you use a triage metaphor, it's the sickest patient. It's what's driving 20 years of wage stagnation and decline. It's at the root of why we have populism in this country. And, anytime when there's something crazy going on in the news, or just about any time I'll tweet, confused by the news, and I kind of run through the numbers I ran through before.
So it's
basically
it's all like Breaking Bad was all about poor health care. Every crime story and political mayhem at its root has this giant suck on our economy and our vitality.
Definitely, it's hugely impacted by these things. So it's basically a blueprint, for how to purchase healthcare and ultimately deliver healthcare smart. The analogy that I use that people are familiar with a lot of times is LEED certified buildings. You may have seen, they took green building practices from a fringe concept 20 years ago to, you could hate the environment today and you'd still follow those practices. And so, that certified professionals and that certified buildings. So Health Rosetta is basically, designed in a similar way, certifying different health plans and health plan components. And, kind of like real estate, where it wasn't like magically one day all the old buildings were raised and the next day they were magically built green. It takes a while for something as entrenched as the built infrastructure or healthcare to ripple through, even though there was a lot of activity throughout the 20 years. And so that's basically what we're doing, is kind of following that template and saying, hey, if you are tired of, getting really poor results for your investment and a poor experience, or you're a healthcare delivery organization, you want to be really built for the future, this gives you the kind of roadmap or travel tips on how to go through that journey, so you get to this destination that is just far, far better.
Gotcha. I don't know how much time you have left. I know we're at the end of our allotted time. I did want to ask you, first of all, to tell the story of Harris Rosen, because that's like so inspiring, especially the community parts of that. And I also wanted to ask you about the big heist. Do you have time for both of those?
Yeah, I'm good on time. No problem.
Oh, cool.
Harris Rosen, he was like any other, entrepreneur running an organization. In his case, it was a hotel company, and was seeing what the healthcare costs were doing to his business and to his people. And just basically, before there was Health Rosetta, he was doing Health Rosetta, which he was doing some of the things we talked about, like proper primary care. If you fast forward, look at what he has done, it's remarkable. So today, despite having a very challenging workforce from kind of a health burden perspective, where, just as one example, 56% of their pregnancies are categorized high risk, that can normally be a budget buster for companies. Despite that, they spend 55% less per capita on health benefits than a typical employer, not by having really horrible benefits. They have the best benefits package I've heard of any company in America, where not only do they have great health benefits, you have access to awesome primary care for free, but on top of that, it's largely an hourly workforce, and they pay. You can go to the primary care clinic on the clock, and they'll even transport you there if you don't have transportation, because they really believe in it. And then and a bunch of other great things on the health benefit side. But then they take money that would have otherwise been sort of frittered away and squandered in healthcare in some of the ways we described, and have created the best benefits package in the country, where they also pay for the employees college education and the employees' kids' college education, if you can believe that. And you can imagine how low turnover is at that organization. And if that wasn't enough, they still have so much money compared to certain, most other companies, that they adopted a nearby crime-ridden community and said, you know what, we're going to invest in this community. We're going to invest in daycare, pre-K, after-school programs, so far 450 college educations. During that time, crime went down 62%, I believe, and high school graduation rates went from 45% to virtually 100% because of that. And the total investment in that community was less than 5% of what they saved compared to other employers. And so they've since adopted a neighborhood 5 times that size, and they're doing the same thing. And so it shows what's possible, not only for one employer, but then by the community. And, they are showing that the way this thing gets fixed is not waiting for the cavalry from DC. That's not going to happen. I think we have decades of evidence, both parties being in full control at different times. Healthcare is getting solved community by community, where that community is an employee, a union, a particular town. So yeah, it's really remarkable what they've done.
Yeah, and that story more than any really hit home for me. Why this is really the citizen's guide, the human's guide to restoring the American dream. Because all of us can agitate at some level, can talk about it with our neighbors at cocktail parties, can just point out the craziness and idiocy of the current situation, which most of us just take for granted and don't even think, oh, this sucks, but they don't think that there could be a better way, or that we already know what it is, which I guess brings us to this really fascinating project that I heard you speak about on several other podcasts, The Big Heist. What's that about?
Yeah, The Big Heist sort of riffs off of my belief that this massive transfer of wealth from the working and middle class that's happened over the last 20 plus years, where, they've basically seen no wage increases during that time. And yet healthcare costs continue to go up, and their out-of-pocket continues to go up. And so, there was a graph I have in the book out of a Wall Street Journal article that shows that, literally it's coming out of families having to spend less on food, less on clothing, less on housing, less on transportation. So I call it the greatest heist in American history because of this massive wealth transfer from the working and middle class to this wildly underperforming healthcare system. And though the industry would like you to believe that solving healthcare is like trying to solve Middle East peace, that's what a lot of people tend to think. It's just not the case. And so what the Big Heist is meant to create that sort of moment of awakening that when you look at other great societal challenges that have faced our country, they almost always get solved bottom up, whether it's things like civil rights or better food or energy independence, climate change, whatever it might be. These things always get solved bottom up. And there's these movements that go on. So, we're building this movement. It's getting ahead of steam. And then there's this sort of moment of awakening that media and film have a tendency to provide that catalyzing event. So you think about films like The Inconvenient Truth, Super Size Me, Food Inc., or you think about Selma. Selma tended to be the event that got on the evening news and the morning newspapers that sort of woke up the rest of America, what was going on, and changed the zeitgeist. And so the Big Heist is, that's the big goal, is to, by the time this movement is really, picking up steam, you then want to turbocharge it and take it to the next level. And so that's our big challenge, is create a wildly entertaining film that stands on its own. You want to watch it independent of, some wonky healthcare guy talking. And then you watch it at a certain point, like, what the heck, little bit like what you might have said with the Big Short.
Uh-huh.
So, it's sort of like the Big Short for healthcare, where it will unpack what is actually going on here. But really it's about, I think you mentioned earlier, the book is about not getting you depressed. It's creating hope and activating people. And so, by the time you walk out of that film and you say, gosh, I'm a faith-based leader, what should I do? I'm a union-based leader, what should I do? I'm a PTA leader, what should I do? I'm a mom, what should I do? I'm a CEO, what should I do? There'll be clear calls to action, clear templates to follow, that you can then solve healthcare in your community, because that's where health starts. Health doesn't start in a pill or at a hospital. It starts at home and mom. That's the foundation of health. And the closer you are to sort of home and mom, the closer you are to health. And we somehow have lost sight of that. And so that's really the film is meant to shine a light on that in a way that, will hopefully be entertaining and awakening.
Wow, that's be amazing. Do you have a sense of like a scene or a conceit that the movie will? Because it's hard for me to picture like taking this thing and making it, understandable and entertaining. Partly, and one of the things I wanted to add to that is that you make it real clear that that doctors, healthcare professionals, and nurses are not the enemy here. In fact, they're some of our biggest victims. So this isn't about like, burning doctors at the stake or saying that they're a bunch of greedy people, but that they're caught up in the system. So, but like what's a scene or an idea that you're thinking of that could sort of make it clear how crazy the situation is and how things could be different? Is there anything you can share at this point?
Absolutely. And I'll caveat this with, I'm no Brad Pitt, and it took him 10 years to get his last film out. And so the way you tell these stories and finance them, that's going to change probably multiple times between now and when the film comes out. But I'll give you a very topical example. And it's at the heart of the next book that I'm writing. And that is the intersection of back pain and the opioid crisis. 80% of us will have an acute back pain issue. Just about anybody can understand what that's about. And the opioid crisis has become the largest public health crisis in 100 years. And if you look at one of the bigger on-ramps to the opioid crisis, it's the disastrous way that we address back pain in this country. And so what we're looking for is something that represents a microcosm of the larger dysfunction. And unfortunately, what I've found with the opioid crisis is it is not an anomaly at all. It's actually the perfectly logical and tragic byproduct of a catastrophically dysfunctional system. And so I really break that down in this next book, say there's 12 major drivers of the opioid crisis. Unfortunately, the media and the government has greatly oversimplified it, and so we'll never get to a solution if you don't fully understand the problem. Every addict needs an enabler, and the key enabler on 11 of the 12 major drivers of the opioid crisis are employers. When you think about it, who's impacted by the opioid crisis? Overwhelmingly, it's working age people and their dependents. Well, who's paid for that? Our benefits. So this is a self-inflicted wound by our wildly underperforming healthcare system. And like you said, it's not about the nurses and the doctors are more victims and also heroes in this than anything. And there's all kinds of crazy things that we've done that have created this toxic brew, that have created the opioid crisis. And so that would be something where if you unpack, this scene where, I was just talking to some folks in Pennsylvania that had a huge issue. Incredibly common chain of events is somebody has a back issue, might be a workplace injury, it could just be, they could be a lawyer, it's not something that's limited to blue collar roles. And then they get non-evidence-based treatments, which is frankly the rule, not the exception when it comes to back pain. So they get an opioid, they get a back procedure they never should have had, some surgery, and then they get prescribed opioids on their way out. And then what happens is some subset of those people, I think it's after 3 days, 1 in 6 people will get addicted following doctor's orders. And then they get addicted. Then they have a problem at work. Then they lose their job. And then this gnarly spiral happens where some get incarcerated, some, less innocuous, they go on Medicaid and that costs us. Some will end up moving to street drugs because that's cheaper and more available to them. And consequently, they may get hepatitis C, and it's just this terrible spiral that happens. And this happens time and time and time again. And the estimate is that of the 3 million nurses, there's 300,000 who are high function addicts. These aren't people that are sort of stereotypical, what you see on the news and, what's going on in, whatever some town in West Virginia. I mean, that's real too, but most of the addicts, you don't actually see them in an obvious way. They're high function addicts. Nurses being a case example of that, where they've got very physically and emotionally draining jobs, and they're often paid hourly. So there's a lot of pressure to get back to work, and they're understaffed. And so they have frankly easy access to the medications as well, which doesn't help. And so that is the most trusted profession, and for good reason. The nurses particularly care for us in our most vulnerable moments, and we just do a terrible job supporting them in this whole process. And the environment they're in is really at the apex of these types of issues.
Yeah. So I feel like just poking at that chain of events a little bit to kind of question what I said, and you agreed with it, that doctors especially are victims here. So it doesn't, it takes me 10 minutes to go on PubMed without any sort of medical training to look and see that what they're doing is not evidence-based. I can go to the NNT.com or any number, Cochrane Collaboration, or any of these places and do a quick search and realize that most of the spinal fusion, the drug treatments are not nearly as effective as lifestyle, as PT. So how are doctors blameless here if they're the ones prescribing these non-evidence-based treatments and prescribing the drugs? Is it just they don't know any better? They're discouraged from looking. There's they'll get sued or slapped by the insurance company if they don't play ball. What's going on with them? Why can't we blame them?
Well, I'm not saying that there's 0% blame, on doctors. There are certainly some who are directly perpetuating that, but the majority aren't. Once they learn, in primary care, doctors were told for a long time that these were non-addictive medications, and then they were a combination of forces were really put pressure on them to prescribe, because there was this whole movement around what they call pain as a fifth vital sign, where it was like, you're temperature and your blood pressure and so on. And then, so they really were told to, because probably for a time, we'd probably undertreated pain. And then they're like, if you wanted to maintain your accreditation to the hospital, you had to do that. And so then there was pressure put on the doctors to do that. And on top of that, they would have a lot of pressure put on by their administration around patient satisfaction scores. And so it takes less time and less, pushback from the patients to just give people a pill. Because a lot of times, advertising works. And, Americans are been taught that there's a magic pill for everything. So they're getting a lot of pressure there. So those are factors. There's also lots of pressure to get people in and out, to hit so-called productivity targets. And you couple that with some of the other factors where patients a lot of times are looking for these medications because they think that's the only way that their pain can get resolved, or maybe they're already addicted. And so, those things all factor in, and then there's other things in terms of pressure to produce revenue for the hospital. They get a lot more money when they do a surgery than when they just do a consult. And some of these things are, there's some gray area, not always black and white. So when you have that pressure, they're going to get nudged over to the more invasive thing, even though that might not even be evidence-based. They should certainly, where there's evidence, should be held accountable. But there's a lot of times where there's other factors at play, and things like not even just like back surgery, there's not evidence. There is just randomness in terms of how many opioids you'll get prescribed, say, after some surgery. One person might prescribe 30, another 60 pills, another 90. And, because they're pressured to produce a lot of volume, they'll prescribe more just so they don't get a callback, because that's going to take them away from revenue producing things. There's a lot of different things at play on that. But those are some of the high level drivers.
Gotcha. So for someone who's a patient who doesn't feel like they have any particular power or leverage in the situation, would you advise them to challenge a doctor who prescribes certain things? Are there ways that we can talk to our doctors to make them look at the evidence or to justify a treatment? Or do you think that's sort of above our pay grade as consumers?
No, I think there's some logical questions. There's some good stuff that Consumer Reports has put together. There's this Choosing Wisely program. They have this little card that's, the size of like a credit card that you can put in your wallet that gives you a few basic questions to ask, in terms of why a test might be done and ensuring there's other options, asking if there are other options available. I had that with our own son, where he, we thought he needed to have his adenoids out when he was younger. Indeed, he did. But we went into the ear, nose, and throat doc, and they said, yeah, we need to take a look at what's going on there. We're going to order CT so we can do that. And I'm going, like, I just learned, CT scan was like getting 1,000 x-rays, and, exposure to radiation, sort of like exposure to sun, when you're young, it's kind of cumulative, and, when it's more young, there's increased cancer risk around that. And of course, there's cost too. And I just said, hey, doc, is there any other way, you can get this without a CT scan? And he's like, oh, sure, we could scope it. He literally didn't even get out of his, chair, swung around, pulled the scope out of a drawer, sprayed some numbing agent up my son's nose. And, less than 2 minutes later, I was looking through the scope up his nose, and I could see what was going on. And so he avoided unnecessary radiation, probably saved $2,000 or $3,000, taking more time off of work, those type of things that just a simple question, in a respectful way can uncover those things. But, they just thought, oh, this guy's got great insurance, do that. It's just the standard way. And so, who knows what was all at play there. But those type of things are certainly smart questions to ask.
Gotcha. Well, Dave Chase, this has been so interesting. I'm thrilled that this book, The CEO's Guide to Restoring the American Dream, exists. That you and I've got to say a whole bunch of collaborators and inspiration you mentioned, and I love that you start the book with the acknowledgments, and that you order the reader to read them all, to not skip through that. I found that extremely refreshing and charming. I'm just wondering, as I'm looking through it now, you mention in the book Anti-Fragile as one of your inspirations for your thinking, and you mentioned the phrase "skin in the game." I'm wondering if you've had a chance to read Taleb's latest book, Skin in the Game.
I haven't read that, actually, no. I'll confess I didn't even know it was out yet.
Oh, it's been out for like 3 weeks.
Okay,
so no.
Yeah. So I'll have to take a look at that. But yeah, Taleb's, he's entertaining, a little caustic, but I buy what he's saying. And I think we need more anti-fragility built into the design of our healthcare system. In a lot of ways, we have, turned all of us into, as he calls, fragilistas, in the way that, we over-treat, and use too many antibiotics, and, there's a consequence to that we all deal with. So yeah, there's some great folks that I relied on a lot, as we talked about throughout our chat. It wasn't like I just climbed to the top of some mountain and dreamed this stuff up. This is all proven stuff, working in every part of the country, small towns, big cities, private companies, public companies, you name it, all over the place, every corner of the country. And it's just a matter of how do we massively replicate what's going on? Healthcare, it's time for it to really get relocalized. You think about it, it's a fundamentally local relationship, but there's all these other fingers in the pie that aren't, not only they're not adding value, they're extracting value. And so I think that's going to be kind of the next era of healthcare. And I think it will be a lot better than the one we have right now for not only patients, but unfortunately, we have record levels of burnout and suicide amongst our nurses and doctors because we've created such a miserable system for them as well. So, we can't lose sight of that.
Right. Well, let the changes come soon, and it's fantastic to have you on the team, on the right side, and pushing for it as clearly and passionately and eloquently as you do. So, Dave Chase, thank you so much for everything you do and for taking time on Plant Yourself podcast today.
My pleasure. And, anybody can go to healthrosetta.org/friends and download a free copy of the book. I just want to get the word out there. So, be promiscuous in sharing that link. I don't mind people ripping it off and making it happen in your community.
Right on. It's a great read. You can get it for free right now on PDF, right?
Yep.
So no excuse. I paid $23 for mine. So if you can get yours for free, good on you. So
yeah. Well, and you can read a chapter or two, and if you like it, go buy it. It's up to you.
Right. Support this movement. And so, Dave, I look forward to meeting you in DC in April. And I guess you'll be on a panel talking about the opioid epidemic. I look forward to shaking your hand and getting an autograph in the book. And again, thanks for everything.
My pleasure. Honored to be on your show.
All right. Be well. All right. What'd you think about that? Are you getting your Howard Beale on from Network? Remember him? I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take this anymore. That's kind of how I felt after reading the book, and I kind of hope it's in a positive, actionable, optimistic way. It's how you feel after listening to this interview. And be sure to check out the show notes for today's episode with links to Health Rosetta and Dave's book and the Big Heist movie. And you can find that all at plantyourself.com/264. So if you enjoyed it and you'd like to support the mission of the Plant Yourself podcast, the easiest thing you can do is just subscribe and leave a review on iTunes or wherever you consume podcasts. It takes just a minute and it really helps our rankings. Another way to support the show, this time with some bucks, is to become a supporter on Patreon. Just go to plantyourself.com, click on the right sidebar, the Patreon link, and you can go there and make an ongoing monthly contribution. I've been hovering around $500 for a couple of months now, which is awesome. It is nowhere near coming close to paying the bills. And I would love to double that by, let's say, 1st of July. Once again, the Big Change Program rides again. Our next bobsled run begins on May 14th, 2018. Go to wellstarthealth.com/program to read about it and to apply. Since this episode is publishing just a day after my last episode, I don't really have any new gardening or running news, except that after publishing yesterday, I did do a nice gentle 4-mile jog. Today, I'm planning on doing a little bit more strenuous 6. And hopefully by next week, I'll be feeling good enough to leave it all on the track or on the hills as I start ramping up my cardio training. Okay, Will Ridenauer, thanks for allowing me to use Sabali Dawn. Hear it? Hear the strains rising now? The Dance of Peace is the theme music for this show. Check out willridenauer.com for more. And thanks to all of you Plant Yourself podcast patrons, as in Kim Harrison, Lynn McClellan, Anthony Disson, Brittany Porter, Dominic Mara, Barbara Whitney, Tammy Black, Amy Good, Amanda Hadley, Mary Jane Wheeler, Ellen Kennelly, Melissa Cobb, Rachel Barris, Christine Nielsen, Tina Sharp, Tina Ahern, Jen Volkanovsky, David Bizek, the mysterious Michelle X, Elspeth Feldman, Victoria Dolomanova, Leah Stoller, Alan Christensen, Colleen Peck, Michelle Andrew, Josina, Julian, Roland, Student, Dolnay, Sarah Dirks, Rosa Circus, Kelly Cameron, Wayne Pedersen, Leanne Peterson, Janet Selby, Claire Adams, Tom Franzik, Jeanette Bennett, Gila, Sarah David Donahue, Blair Cyber, Doro Navia, Gio, Carolyn Argentini, Jody Friesen, Ruth Ann Funderburg, Misha Roast, Michael Warbeck, the equally mysterious Tracy Z, Alicia Lemus, Rebecca Hughes, Val Linneman, rhymes with cinnamon, Nick Harper, Stephanie Holmes, Martha Bergner, Rathie, Nicole Ramsey, Susan Almut, Molly Levine, the inscrutable Harry R., Susan Laverty, the Panda Vegan, Craig Kovic, Adam Sharp, Karen Burry, Heather Morgan, Ashley Corker, and Kelly Machia, Deanne Norton, Bonnie Lynch, Plant Happy Organs, Sabine Kurtzels, Nigel Davies, Marion Blum, Teresa Copel, Shell Rutledge, Jill Watt, Julian Watkins, Breed O'Connell, Brian Sheridan, Shannon Hirschman, Kate Rolls, Linda Ayat, Julie Lang, Holm, Hedda Cardiza, Tuzin, Wakani, Hainline, Aaron Greer, Alicia Davis, Avita Lyle, Heather O'Connor, Carolyn Jens, Cherry Olakovsky, the Planet Earth for Health. Karen Smith, Scott Morani, Karen and Joe Crabtree, Tanya Lewis, Kirby Burton, Teresa Carell, Kevin McCauley, Elizabeth Rothschild, Kelly Baker, Miracle Ann, Jesse, Cheryl Dwyer, Jenny Hazelton, and welcoming a new contributor, Valerie Peltier, for your generous support of the podcast. That's it for today. I'll be back on Friday with another episode. As I mentioned, I've got a huge backlog and I want to get these out into the world. And as always, be well, my friends.